This is a Geek Leader. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 184 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's episode is brought to you by Live at Manning Conferences, Math for Data Science. If you're securing a job in data science, artificial intelligence, machine learning, or cryptography, or any other programming field, you have to realize that it requires strong math skills. And the Live at Manning Conference Series is doing an event, Math for Data Science, and it is a unique chance to learn from some of the statisticians and other math masters that are involved in the Manning network of experts. And it's a free event, which is awesome. It's live on Twitch on December 1st, on December 1st, 2020 at noon Eastern Time. And you can find out more about that at geekleader.com/math. Again, that's at geekleader.com/math. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Didier Cossin, and he is the author of a book called High Performance Boards, which when I first got it, this book, I thought, wow, this is pretty interesting because I am on the board of directors and I'm kind of new. This is my, I guess I'm just finishing up my first year of being on the board. So this is kind of an important thing. But a little bit about Didier. Didier is the founder and director of IMD Global Board Center, and he's also a professor. Didier, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be with you.
If you don't mind, tell the audience just a little bit about kind of your background, how you got to where you are today, and finish up with why you decided to write High Performance Boards.
Yeah, with pleasure. I did my doctorate quite a while ago now, like 30 years ago. I did my doctorate in finance, in financial matters. And then little by little, I started working with boards of directors on their key financial decisions, the key investments. And then more and more, I started to realize that the biggest risk and the biggest investment was in the boards themselves, actually, and the quality of the boards. And quality governance has been a major driver of performance. It's a driver of performance for organizations, but it's also a driver of performance for investments. Investing in better governed companies works the best. And so overall, my whole specialization has been in governance, working with boards very much across the world. It goes from Asia, Japan, China, Singapore, to Europe, to the US, Washington, New York, and throughout the world, truly.
Okay. So for a new guy like me, so I just got onto the board of directors for a local bank, and I'm from technology background, so I'm new to finance. I'm new to being on the board. What do I need to know about governance and what my role is as a board member?
Well, first we have to look into what's governance about. Governance is about the quality of the decision making at the top of organizations. How do you ensure that you have the right strategy? How do you ensure that you have the right CEO? How do you ensure that you make the right choices as an organization? So governance is not compliance. Compliance is a part of it, right? But it goes much beyond compliance. And so if you think about quality of decision making, you have quite a few dimensions that you need to think about. You need to think about, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the competency? Clearly, you're brought in because of your tech competencies. But you want also to think whether the board as a whole has the right competencies. And you want to think whether the board has the right information, whether it has the right processes of decisions, and whether it has the right culture. So I've, throughout my practice working with boards, I've come to these 4 pillars as driving board performance. Number 1 is the people. Number 2 is the information. Number 3 is structures and processes. And number 4 is culture.
Okay, so as being on the board, or when you're deciding who should be on the board, when you look at people, how much does diversity play into that?
Yeah, diversity is a big driver of performance of boards, because diversity drives 2 things. It drives creativity, innovation, and it also drives understanding of different stakeholders. because typically, when you bring diversity, whether it's gender diversity or ethnic diversity or simply diversity of perspectives, you are connected to another part of society. You are connected to other people. And so diversity is a big driver of performance, but good diversity is not easy. Diversity typically comes with misunderstandings, with more difficulties to align. And you can see as a tech guy in a finance board how your own style is probably different from the others. And probably it is a bit harder for you to understand how the others are speaking, etc. And so good diversity is difficult. It's a great driver of performance, but you have to bring people together through a process of discussion, of constructive dissent to be really successful. It takes quite a bit from the chair to manage diversity. And diversity does not create performance per se. You have very diverse organizations that are deeply underperforming. Think the United Nations, right? United Nations is typically not a model of governance, right? and it is highly diverse. And so in order to have a diverse board that works well, you need a great chair, great culture, and a cohesion that is built around the diversity.
So, I'm going to talk a lot from my perspective because that's really all I know. I was added to the board a little over a year ago, but most of my board time has been during COVID. And one of the things is we try to, the company that I'm on the board of, we try to have a diverse board. So we try to have people from different backgrounds. Me, I'm from a tech background, which is very different than the other folks at the bank that are more from a financial background. Also, I'm one of the younger people on the board, and there's a big age difference between a lot of the different members. But how is it that a chairperson or someone on the board can help, I guess, get information out of a diverse team? Because I know for me, sometimes I feel awkward. I feel like I shouldn't be talking during the meetings because I don't know anything about, your budgeting process or some of the things that other folks may know about. What are some things that you can do to maybe improve that culture and that alignment between the different folks on the board?
So there are a few elements, right? First, there is a principle of governance is a form of equal participation, that everybody can speak and everybody can speak up. And there is also a level of secrecy, right? So that we can ask stupid questions. And that somehow this is respected because, from time to time, the stupid question is what triggers a difference in the reflection. And once we are all nominated on a board, I think there is, in the better boards, a certain evaluation of the performance, a regular review of whether the board is doing well, whether the discussions are rich, whether the information is sufficient, whether the styles of discussions, are solid, so that there is no groupthink, that there is no bias, right? And that somehow there is the ability to discuss openly all the topics that should be discussed within the board. Some people even have red flags of, biases, of let's say, board members cutting each other's or grandstanding from some, or simply, mental biases of overconfidence from the board itself or from some individuals or other type of mental biases. So some people even have, on the boardroom poster with red flags to watch for. But overall, you want to have a flowing discussion, right? Where everybody can contribute. Obviously, your contribution as a tech person will be mostly from the tech side, right? We won't expect you to discuss the economic capital refinements or whatever. But nonetheless, you're bringing in a naive question sometimes triggers the right reflection from the board. And thus your contribution to all elements have to be respected. Respect is also part of the quality board.
So how have you seen COVID-19 affect some of the performance of boards as far as, being separated and having to make decisions really quickly about whether you should close down or open up, or how government mandates are going to affect the company or company's financial basis and things like that?
Well, there is a dimension where actually digital has been good because often, board members are not located geographically at the same place, etc. So they've been able to meet more often and faster. And decision making has been actually quite fast with, Zoom board meetings or Teams board meetings, etc. And the problem is more in the long term, that boards have been quite agile. They have been quite involved and present, even more than in the past, but the depth of discussion is not the same. It is not possible at today's date with technology to have the same depth of discussion on strategic issues, on ESG, that you would have. Typically on Zoom, there is, less dissent. It's faster to agree together, and the discussions are less deep. And that is a threat to the quality of governance long term. The digital meetings are here to stay. They accelerate things. Board meetings are more frequent thanks to them. And I think that's here to stay as well. But the physical side has still a complementary dimension to the digital meetings. And we'll need to get back to that. I actually have some boards that have decided still to meet physically and to complete that with some digital meetings, which I think is a better solution for the future.
I know for us, we've gone pretty much all digital, and we're starting to. I think the next board meeting, they're going to have some people back in that are meeting on site. The rest of us digital, and I do find myself drifting off a little bit sometimes on the digital, not being as engaged because you have to unmute and talk and mute, and it gets a little hectic, and sometimes it's like, well, I'll just hold off on this question, instead of asking it. And I see that as one of the things that is, hindrance to us. But one thing, like you said, we can meet more frequently. So now it's not like you don't have to schedule a month out. It's something that they can just send a meeting and say, hey, can you guys jump on the call Friday and let us talk about what's going on? And that's been helpful as well.
That's very right. So agility has increased, but depth of consideration has decreased.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you talk about in your book is you have like a little pyramid, I believe, that talks about conflicts of interest and things like that. Can you talk a little bit about that, and what do we need to be thinking about if we're on the board and we may find ourselves in a conflict of interest?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I've been dealing with organizations that had deep conflicts of interest. For example, I've been dealing with the International Olympic Committee that was confronted with conflicts of interest, from the athlete representatives, from country representatives, on city selection, etc. And I've come to the mind that, this is really an area where transparency at board level is key. And thus, having a good reflection on conflicts of interest. By the way, we all have conflicts of interest. There is always some form of conflict of interest, if only, to spend time on the board rather than being with family or doing something else, right? So there is always a level of conflict of interest. And what we have to be watchful for is those that distort our attention. Being a friend of someone who's getting form of approval from the board, or being linked to a supplier, or having a linkage to an influential stakeholder, shareholder. And all of these are absolutely essential to flag out. And then I work with a local bank here, where it's been decided actually that in front of a conflict of interest, the person will just not be present in the room or will abstain from the vote, having some clear rules but especially for, community organizations, for these organizations that are highly involved in the community, conflict of interest arrives very fast, right? Because the world is small, you tend to know people at that level quite quickly. And so paying attention to it is a safeguard for the employees, it's a safeguard for the organization, it's a safeguard for the health of the organization. And being systematic about it. So in my book, High Performance Boards, I promote, a few tools to be able to be systematic around this type of issues. But protecting an organization from conflicts of interest is essential. And it is part of good governance, that's for sure.
Yeah, and in your book, you talk a lot about values and the importance of leadership and values on the board. Can you talk a little bit about what values you're looking for, you're talking about, and how can we encourage our board members to kind of be educated in those?
Well, I think the number one value that's very natural for people that have been elevated to the level of a board member is a sense of responsibility and accountability. I think when one gets nominated to the board of an institution, there is a responsibility for the health of that organization, right? The board is there to supervise and to support the success of that organization, typically with, large number of employees, large numbers of customers, large numbers of suppliers involved. And so there is a real social responsibility in being a board member and having a good sense that you're there not for your self-promotion, but you're there because of the responsibility and the accountability involved is, to me, a number one value for a board member. But then you have others, right, such as integrity. We've talked about conflict of interest, right, making the right choices, independence, having, even if you're not fully independent, and maybe sometimes you are not independent at all, you're still a board member, which in my view should have independence of mind. And then there is another value that is less well known, but that is very important in board work, which is a one voice principle. And the one voice principle is that the board has a voice. That voice is usually voiced by the chair, the chairwoman or the chairman. But there is only one voice for a board. You as a board member, you don't have a voice. You participate to the discussion, you express yourself, but outside the boardroom, there is no more voice for the board member. The voice is only the board's voice. John, are you there?
Yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we need to think about as a board is coming together with unity. And I know right now we've had some issues, especially politically in the United States, where there's been divisiveness, but unity is really important when it comes to being the leaders of the boards. What are some other things that we need to think about when it comes to having that single voice of the board?
You have to be careful, right? Because good governance is still built on constructive dissent, right? So it's not about groupthink, right? It's not about, alignment. For example, in my view, in a CEO team, in an executive team, you need much more alignment than on the board. A board is formed of peers, right? Nobody, as a chair, is not the boss of the board, right? The chair is simply moderating the board. And thus, you need still constructive dissent, which is at the heart of getting to a quality decision making. And so it's not only unity, it's what I would call a level of trust, the trust that everybody on the board is dedicated and is focused and contributes to the organization successfully. It's also a sense of integrity and a sense of responsibility, as I've described before.
So let me ask you a question that's a little off topic, maybe, but maybe it's not. Maybe it ties in. What are your thoughts on like term limits for being on the board, or like a maximum duration of being allowed to be on a board?
So in many regulatory environments, after 3 mandates, typically you lose your independence. I think it's reflective of the truth. I don't think there is any need to limit the time, but it should be recognized that after 10 years on a board, 9 years, 12 years, depending, right? You're not independent anymore. You are too embedded in the system to have an independent view. And so to me, that's the right way to think about it. That means that as independence is a key value of governance, independence of perspectives, that means that you contribute less. So it may be for a specific individual, right? An owner, for example, it's still fine. But I think for many board members, it means it's time to go. And another dimension there is that the best boards generate renewal. For the best board, I have a chair who has decided that on her board, one board member will leave every year, so that you have renewal, so that you have fresh views, fresh perspectives all the time. It's a board of 8. One every year means 8 years, right? So you still have plenty of time, but it also means that you don't know who's going to leave. So it leaves room for meritocracy in the boardroom. Those that contribute the most are actually staying the more.
Yeah. So the board that I'm on, we just implemented basically kind of like term limits, I guess, if you want to say, related to a political, where you have a maximum length on there. And the reason why they did that is because there were a couple of folks that have been on the board for, decades. And it was one of those things where we wanted to get new life into the board, but we didn't want people to be kicked out because they were still valuable. But you're right, they weren't bringing that new perspective, that they were, like you said, part of, they were assimilated into the organization at that point.
That's right. I think if they're not independent anymore, they may still have value, right? But clearly they don't bring that anymore.
Right. So what are some common pitfalls that you see boards falling into that kind of ruins them or makes them ineffective?
I think when I look at governance overall, I found that boards can kill organizations on 4 dimensions. One is technical risks. Think about BP during the Macondo field explosion, let's say, or Boeing. Boeing is a good example also. Second is strategy. Think about Kodak, inventor of digital, and fails on digital photography, right? The third is the quality of the relationship between executives and non-executives. Is this a trusted relationship? Is this a quite symbiotic relationship or not? And the fourth are integrity issues. And I would say from these 4, you get 95% of organizational failures that are linked to the board. And integrity issues, by the way, are very present around the world, much more than what we expect. And that can mean, sometimes brown envelopes with money circulating, right? Or, adjudication of contracts or things like that, right? But often is much more simple conflict of interest, being there for the prestige, etc. And so the lack of integrity is still something that's very present in the world.
Yeah, and you talk in your book a little bit about fraud and board oversight. I think you use Wells Fargo as an example with that. What is there to be oversight for the board?
So in terms of fraud, first, it's important to realize that if you look, for example, at SEC fraud investigations, so this is for listed companies, right? SEC fraud investigations, you have 90% of SEC fraud investigations, you had one member of the top management team that was involved. So when you're on the board, you tend to have, a bit of a comfortable relationship with the top executives. But at the same time, it's important to realize that in 90% of the case, they are involved in fraud. Another statistic that I found interesting, and that's a global statistic, not a US statistic, which is the percentage of CFOs, chief financial officers, that declare that they have been pushed by their CEO to change the numbers. And 56% of CFOs declare that they have been pushed to change the numbers. And so fraud is around, right? And so then comes the question, how do you detect fraud? And most boards tend to rely on an audit committee and on external auditors, and typically the big firms, right? Actually, the percentage of fraud that is detected by external auditors is only of 3%. So it's not even one case in 20, right? Then you rely on your internal audit function, the controller, etc. That's about 22% of the cases of fraud uncovered, which means that internal audit plus external audit uncovers only one fraud in 4 that is uncovered. And so what is the best way to uncover fraud? It's people speaking up. It's whistleblowing if you want, but in general, right? People speaking about issues. And so the best way to protect against fraud is a culture that is open, and the ability for people to speak about issues when they see them. And thus, as a board, you want to make sure to foster that kind of culture, where somehow you provide psychological safety, because it's dangerous to speak up. You provide psychological safety so that people can speak up when they need to.
Yeah, I think transparency is super important to allow for folks to feel like they have the freedom and the okay to speak up, and they're not going to get persecuted for it.
That's right. Absolutely.
So what other pieces of advice would you have for a new board member that's just now getting their feet wet, their first time being on a board, and what should they do to make an impact and feel like they're making a difference?
Well, a board is a big responsibility. And don't be mistaken, many boards don't work well. And so before accepting a board, even if it's a prestigious board, even if it's an attractive board, I recommend to do your due diligence. And by the way, the book I just published, High Performance Boards at Wiley, that's on sale on Amazon.com or on any other bookshop, provides good guidance on how to do that due diligence and how to work whether the board is effective and how to help a board improve its effectiveness overall. But many boards are underperforming. I have been quoted for saying that 90% of boards are failing. Maybe not quite 90% anymore, but many, many boards, it's a majority of boards that are not doing so well. And so I encourage you to do a solid due diligence before accepting the board and making sure that you want to take the personal risk of being on that board. And then board work is hard work. There is a real commitment that comes with that. And so there, again, I encourage you to check out High Performance Boards, Improving and Energizing Your Governance at Wiley by myself, Didier Cossin, to make sure that you actually do what's right for the board and fulfill your fiduciary responsibility.
Yeah, and I'll speak to to that. It is definitely hard work. I had no idea it was so much reading. We get these reports every month from that are brought up with all this information, all these policies that are going through, all the different financial documents. There's lots of reading that has to go on.
That's right. That's right. Well, especially for you in a bank, there is so much from the regulatory side and big packages there. And as you get to be a member of a committee, etc., it's all of these are piling up. And in some countries now, ignorance has become criminal on the board. For example, on the bank board in the UK, governance rules makes it that not knowing is considered criminal, which is amazing, right? So social responsibility of being on the board is quite something these days.
Yeah, and for us too. I mean, we're part of different federal organizations, so we are held liable if the company does something that's illegal or they fraudulently, if they're giving out loans at different rates to different people and they're discriminating. That's right. We can be held liable as being on the board. So we definitely have to stay on top of our oversight and making sure that the company's being doing what they're supposed to do within the law.
That's right, which calls for real professionalism, being systematic about it, and I think it's not a tick the box type of exercise, right? It's figuring out whether we are doing the right things as a board and whether we've been able to foster an effective board overall and to contribute to the effectiveness of the board.
So how can people find out more about you and the things that you're doing, and where can they pick up a copy of your book?
So I'm very easy to find on the internet simply by a Google search on my name, for example, and Didier Didier Cossin Cossin, Didier Cossin. You can also find me on imd.org, and the book itself is widely available. It's called High Performance Boards. It's published at Wiley, and it's available, on Amazon and on online bookshops and on quite a few material bookshops as well around the country.
All right, and we're going to link that up in the show notes too, and you can find that at geekleader.com, and it's also going to be on our books that we recommend page. So if you forget the title or something like that, you guys are listening, you can remember just to go to geekleader.com, and we'll have it all linked up there. Thank you so much, Didier, for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed talking to you, and thank you for this book because I learned a lot about some of the things that I need to be doing a little bit better job of being on the board.
Thanks a lot, John. It was a pleasure to be with you.
Hope you guys enjoyed that interview. And if so, please share it with a friend. Don't forget to leave a rating and review in Apple Podcast and share the episode on social media. And also, don't forget about our sponsor, the Manning's Math for Data Science Conference. It's a free event on December 1st, and you can find out more about that at geekleader.com/math.